Hello, welcome to the ODI Lunchtime Lecture on Friday 2nd of November. Thank you very much to those of you in the room who've given up your lunchtime to be here, and thank you very much to people at ODI Leeds who are live streaming this as well, and we're also live streaming from London. So today we have the great pleasure of introducing Alistair Gentry, who is the Data as Culture Embedded R&D Artist in Residence at the ODI. Data as Culture is the art programming element of the ODI's activities. We invite artists to critically engage with data and network culture and raise a lot of the questions that perhaps don't get asked so easily through industrial activities, and that sort of find the cracks in the system and the funny bits and the unexpected bits. We do exhibitions, events, and residencies, but what's very special about our relationship with Alistair is he's the very first artist we've had in residence who's been part of an active ODI piece of research. So the ODI is currently doing a large piece of research for government called the R&D programme, and Alistair is the embedded artist in residence on that programme. So he's raising a lot of questions within that team. As an example of some of the things artists achieve for us, I've been working with the ODI for 4 years, and Alistair had been here for a week when he told me that the best way to communicate with colleagues is through the PET Slack channel. So immediately he dived in there, and I think that's something that Alistair is really amazing at doing, is connecting with people, connecting people ideas and things. And I'm not going to say much more about his work, which ranges from the humorous to the dark to the absurd, but I am going to let Alistair speak for himself, so I hope you'll help me in welcoming him to the stage.
Hello, thank you for coming. Hello, Internet. My name is Alistair Gentry. I'm an artist and writer. I've been doing this for about 25 years now. And I'll just explain this little image here, which is a doll version of me. Because I was looking at how a lot of kind of the most famous artists in the past, it's like you've really made it when there's a doll made of you, right? There was a Frida Kahlo doll, and if you go to the museums in Amsterdam, you'll see dolls of people like Van Gogh. You'll see dolls of Rembrandt. There's a candle where you can set light to Rembrandt's head. So I thought, well, nobody's going to make a doll of me while I'm alive. So I thought I'd make one of myself while I'm alive, so I can enjoy it. So yeah, that's right. It's like a little kind of ceramic kind of bisque doll version of myself. And also, this is a project I may come back to. I was thinking of making dolls of all of the artists I know who aren't famous. So you just have this kind of quite pathetic collection of people that nobody knows what they look like anyway, but there's dolls of them. So yeah, I thought that was good. And also, I was kind of mindful of a great story about the playwright Henrik Ibsen, he was sick and tired of constantly being nominated for awards and never winning them. So in the end, he just went out and bought a set of medals for himself, and he used to walk around Oslo wearing the medals that he'd bought for himself. So yeah, that's one of my pieces of advice to artists and to everyone really, is award yourself. Don't wait for other people to give you awards. Award yourself. Okay, so yeah, my work it covers lots of different media, and I've done lots of different things. But there's things that have gone through my work recently. All of my work has these things in common, really. It's kind of the lecture, which I'm doing now, and the performance lecture. And for those who don't know, a performance lecture is kind of a lecture in character, and it's not necessarily factual either. So you can do a lecture that is about something that doesn't exist. You can do a lecture in the character of somebody who doesn't exist or somebody who's in the past. You can create a lecture in which the audience has a horrifying experience as a result of having that lecture, for example, rather than the usual kind of didactic educational lecture format. Don't worry, this one's not going to be horrifying, I hope. Another thing that I'm really interested in, particularly with regard to technology, is ritual and irrationality. Like in the modern developed world, there's a real temptation to think, oh, we're not irrational, we're not superstitious, but we all are. No matter what our culture, no matter where in the developed world or the undeveloped world we live, we are all prey to the same ritual and irrationality. And this can come through, just as an example, shouting at your computer, wanting to, punch your computer's screen in when it's crashed for the third time. It's futile to get angry at a laptop, but we do. We anthropomorphize, we have a kind of animistic view of computers as well. You know, they're stupid, they don't have any consciousness, and yet we treat them as if they have maliciously frozen at the moment when we need to send that particularly important email. And this is something that, and again, you know, supposedly superstitious people, they're rational as well. You know, whatever their culture, whatever part of history they come from or came from, they were rational as well. They sort of knew that the trees weren't really literally conspiring against them, and yet they still did rituals about ensuring that the trees were fruitful. Institutions and authority. I'm quite naturally or inherently sceptical and subversive of authority. I was quite a bad student at school. I was very challenging of teachers. I'm not proud of it now, but I made a few teachers cry. But I'm interested in the idea of institutions and authority, and I've worked in museums and in art galleries, which are a lot of their prestige and mystique and power is about authority as well. Even though art is generally thought of as being like quite a wild and woolly thing, there's a lot of authority invested in art and the artist and the mystique of the artist as well. So I like to explore that and undermine that. I also like exploring and playing with kind of ritual dress, like the modern form of ritual dress, which is things like high-vis jackets. You know, I'm really fascinated by the way that high-vis jackets now, they make you actually disappear, because it means that you're a type of worker who is doing a certain type of thing in a public place. So if you put a high-vis jacket and a cap on, you can go and do anything, anywhere, pretty much, without being challenged. I like the idea of things like ID cards and things. I've done things where you just like print out an ID card, because people look at the fact that you have ID. They don't look at your ID. You know, it's very rare for people to actually scrutinise whether you're, and I deliberately write nonsense things on them, so to kind of, it's almost like catch me, you know. And also the thing at the bottom, it's kind of satire and comedy. There's a lot of humour that goes through my work. Even when I'm catching people out in my work, it's always about, if I've caught them out, I always then kind of turn it inside out, like origami, I guess. It's like to show them how they were caught out and to help them maybe not be so caught out by these things in future. So this is one of the things that in particular relates to the kind of trust issues that the team I'm part of at ODI is looking at. You know, why we trust, who we trust, how and in what ways that trust can be misplaced. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a few other projects that relate to this subject. This is a show called Magickal Realism, which I did in various formats for quite a few years, 4 years. So this was a touring show. It was about 90 minutes long. It went out to all kinds of places, to art galleries, but it also went to university lecture rooms. I did it in a Roman villa on the Isle of Wight on Halloween. You know, it went out to all kinds of strange places, because this was about a period of very interesting to me period of our history. It's kind of loosely based on John Dee, who some of you may have heard of. He was the court wizard, basically, of Elizabeth I, but he was at the point in the Renaissance where scientists, there wasn't a word for a scientist at that point, but he was on the cusp of being, he had 1 foot in the world of kind of superstition and magic, and 1 foot in the modern world of what we now call science. He was a kind of a superstar in his time. He did lecture tours talking about mathematics, which again, advanced mathematics at that time was the cutting edge. You know, things like really looking into what algebra could do and equations and optics and how these things related to the real world. He got into trouble at university for creating a flying mechanical beetle that scared people so much that he got accused of witchcraft. But again, it was science. He was also very into optics and lenses and all of these kind of things. But at the same time, he sat and did seances and communicated with the spirit world, what he called the angelic world. And he worked through most of his life with a convicted fraudster called Edward Kelly, who was also a government agent. And he, I won't talk too much about the story behind it, but one of the greatest things that ever came through in these seances was the angels via Edward Kelly, who was the medium. The angels said, "Don't trust Edward Kelly through Edward Kelly. So, and that to me, that kind of encapsulates the kind of things I'm interested in looking at in my work, is like, and all of those kind of logical paradoxes as well, is like, it's like even a stop clock tells the right time twice a day, you know, like companies or entities that lie to us all the time, sometimes they almost sort of tell their lies are so grandiose, they sort of almost loop around to become the truth again. So yeah, this was a show that lasted about 90 minutes live. It included reenactments of the seances, the angelic communications. It was me kind of telling part of the story that I've just told you there. There was a lot of interaction with it. And it was also to kind of really draw those very close parallels with then and now. You know, there was a lot of hysteria at the time in about Catholic conspirators, you know, as we're coming up to November the 5th, you know, where the Catholic conspirators got very close to actually blowing up Parliament and killing the King, which was their aim. So there were real extremists at the time, but there was also a lot of paranoia about who's a Catholic, who's a plotter, you know, all of this kind of stuff, which obviously finds real parallels nowadays with hysteria about kind of Islamic extremism and the fact that, you know, they genuinely are Islamic terrorists, but also there are thousands or millions of perfectly law-abiding, ordinary people who just happen to be Muslims, but they get swept up in this narrative too. Yeah, and it had live video that went throughout, so this was quite a complicated weaving of kind of, I think, hundreds of hours of found footage, so it was different every time. There's video going on behind me, and it was all sort of done. And this is another thing of mine, is kind of, I make costumes and things as well. I learn by making things as well. So the rough, and I talked about this in the show actually, there's hundreds of meters of fabric in one of those roughs. And just knowing that and having actually worked on one, it makes you realise you look at art history in a whole different way, just from that one little piece of detail. Just you look at those paintings and the social status of the people in them, and you realise why that was a status symbol, because they're really hard to keep clean, they're really hard to make. There's hundreds of hours, and I'll come back to this idea later. There's hundreds of hours of somebody else's labour in that rough. In this case, it was my labour, but in the historical period in which people were wearing them, there was hundreds of hours of manufacturing time in them, hundreds of hours of other people's cleaning and looking after them, for this status symbol of this white starched rough. So I'm very interested in how these details that we often don't pay attention to can say a huge amount about the society and culture in which they exist. That will do. This is a show I did like really recently at Sight Gallery in Sheffield, which relates again to kind of divination and technology, and yeah, obviously this, as some of you will see, this is modelled on the old kind of seaside fortune-telling booths, but it was kind of much, again, a bit of a kind of sinister environment where I was using like old analog technology as a divination tool, and also the Argos catalogue, which you can see me sitting here. But again, this is an example of how you can wrap ritual and kind of mysticism around anything, because I was using the Argos catalogue almost like the I Ching. You know, it's like the person would give me certain information, and this is work I've done before in other contexts as well, of kind of interviewing people, doing the kind of stage magician kind of cold reading of people, saying, okay, yeah, you've got a sister, haven't you? Yeah, she's not been well recently. You know, her name begins with R. Rachel? Yeah, Rachel, that's right. Yeah, that's the name that was coming to me. So these are all techniques that you can use, and I was using these here to kind of interrogate people without them knowing it. And then you go to the Argos catalogue, open it randomly, and there's always something that pertains to their life in it, no matter what page. You know, if you've kind of done the work with them, even for a few minutes, you open the book and you show them the picture, and you don't even have to say anything to them. You say, okay, the book is showing you this, and they say, yeah, kettles. Yeah, that's really meaningful. You know, it's just, you know, exercise equipment. Yeah, that's just, I should go back to the gym. I know I should. So yeah, this was a whole little ritual that I created where I would talk about also the things that were stopping them from achieving what the book had shown to them. And yeah, there was a shredder there where you destroy physically the idea. And then these little things next to me, they were like little kind of black nuggets that I would actually eat, you know, which is again is like a callback to sort of these kind of shamanic ideas where that there are people in the community that kind of process the bad stuff, you know, and not to get too grandiose, but I mean that's what the artists I like do as well. They're processing the stuff that other people don't have time or energy to do in our society. That's why artists are important. One of the reasons why artists are important. So this project, this is again is a project that I've worked on for a very long time called the Portland Office for Imaginary History. The Isle of Portland is in Dorset. Half of London, nearly half of London, is built from Portland stone. The British Museum, Buckingham Palace, all the symbols and buildings of authority in Britain, or also in Britain, but particularly in London. Whitehall, so named for the Portland stone, is built from the hollowing out of the Isle of Portland, which has also been an Admiralty base, a secret place for many years and still is. They do research on magnetic shielding of warships there, among other things, now. So it's got this kind of identity of being like this hollowed out kind of quarry place, and there's a lot of secrecy around it. And it has a very kind of specific community which holds on very strongly to their community identity. So this is a project I was lucky enough to actually be embraced by that community to go and do this work. The Portland Office for Imaginary History was a satirical tourist information office. I actually had an office that was done up like an information centre, but all of the information in it was false. It was kind of exploring the idea of tourism being always about stories, really. So like the example I gave was you go to there are some self-evidently spectacular tourist sites like the Grand Canyon, or I'll think of another example. I'll think of a counter-example. Like the Grand Canyon is self-evidently magnificent. You go to even the Acropolis in Greece, half of it's laying on the floor. You know, it's kind of beautiful what is there, you know, and there's kind of a certain sort of romantic beauty in the fact that it is all falling down and destroyed. But you need to use a lot of imagination. You can go even further and you go to kind of archaeological sites and they say, this is an important Neolithic site, you know, this is where people were first doing whatever they were first doing. But what's actually there is a hole in the ground, you know, it's like it's grass, you know, with a square hole in it, you know, and you need to use a lot of imagination there, and somebody could say that to you, and unless you're an expert in, you know, prehistory, you wouldn't necessarily know whether they were telling you the truth. So this is something that I wanted to highlight, the fact that also that lots of different types of people are erased from history, or not even erased because they're never there. So actually, sometimes the only way that you can actually find those people in history is to make them up. You know, because women don't get, you know, women are not recorded, people of colour are not recorded, LGBT people are not recorded, poor people are not recorded, illiterate people are not, you know, just everyone, basically, virtually everyone. And you can't even find them because the records are just not there in the first place. They just did not live lives that were deemed worthy of having traces, in most cases. So this was my attempt to kind of emphasise that and to put them back, even if I had to do that by making them up. So, and you can see what I was talking about here. This was an entire kind of logoed, branded environment. I had uniform, I had the high vis on. There was like fact sheets that were all branded, and so it looked like a real place. There were postcards, there were souvenirs that you could buy of things that had never happened. And it was a very successful project, successful enough that I was asked to go back and do it again this year. So yeah, this is an important thing. And again, I sort of doing these tours, I was kind of not making any great pretense that I was not myself, but I was not myself. And I was saying things with a straight face to people that were just literally not true. But part of what I do is about kind of, it's what they call in filmmaking suturing. It's like being sewn in. It's like where you get into that particular little world and you play by the rules of that world for the time that you're in it. And in that sense, I think people often question whether performance art is really art or whether contemporary art in general is really art. I think that's what interesting artists do. Even a painter on a wall, they're bringing you into another world. They're bringing you into a world that they've created. The only difference is that they're doing it from a particular place and time. Somebody like me is bringing you into another world now, you know, in this place and this time. And you have to be in this place and this time to experience it. But otherwise, it's a little different. Oh, that slide's in the wrong order. I'll have to come back and find her later. So, okay, well, I'll move on to what I'm interested in doing here. One of my starting points coming here was the this Wizard of Oz A.I. This is something that was coined by somebody else. I'm afraid I can't find who actually coined it, but it's a thing that's been mentioned. And what this is the technological industry and the data industry's tendency to upplay the technological sophistication of what they do. The tech world is, like all other industrial revolutions, propped up by a huge workforce of unseen human beings. Some of them have actually gone further, which is what particularly attracted my attention. There are now companies running things, or startups running things, that have a front end that looks like an AI, or looks like it's some kind of doing some complex tech stuff, but in the background all it's really doing is doing good old-fashioned human work. It's somebody sitting there with a search engine. It's somebody sitting there typing stuff out. It's kind of like a UI on top of something like Mechanical Turk, which is Amazon's service, where you can basically pay someone virtually nothing to carry out small menial online or tech tasks, you know, to sort through a list, you know, to fill out a spreadsheet. But yeah, but now there's a whole other layer which has gone on top of that, where they're using those kind of services of those kind of usual kind of disempowered kind of gig economy people, but pretending it's a machine, which really fascinates me, you know. And this also goes to trust as well, because people are increasingly trusting machines more than a human being. So if you think you're interacting with a machine or an AI or a UI, user interface, you will say and do things that you wouldn't say if you thought there was a human being looking at it directly. So this actually is kind of a breach of trust, really, to run things that look like they're technological but are actually just a person in disguise. But this can also be a good thing, you know. It's using the Wizard of Oz analogy. Actually, the wizard he's a fraud, but he does in fact give the kind of characters what they want in the end, and what they want is within them anyway. Yeah, it's an interesting aside as well in the film. This is little. If you read the books, the Emerald City is also false. They actually made a real Emerald City for the famous film. In the book, the wizard has convinced everybody in the city to wear emerald glasses at all times, so everything looks green, and they're never to take them off. Like, that's one of his rules. You put the emerald glasses on, you never take them off outside your own home. So again, I think this is a great kind of metaphor for some of the technological developments that we've had. You know, you wear your emerald glasses, and the Emerald City becomes the Emerald City and not just a city. So that's one of the things that interests me as well, and also that relates to my other work as well. Just the idea that you can be telling lies to people, but there's some cases where that can still lead to a good conclusion. Tech Bros. This is, for those who don't know, this is Elon Musk smoking weed very ostentatiously in public. Yeah, this is interesting to me as well, and this relates to the Portland office and like other things in my work. Some of us have more reason to trust technology and data infrastructure than others, and some of us are impacted more than others by the kind of overriding kind of moral framework of the tech and the data industries, which, as we know, is largely dominated by the very educated white male, often American, of a particular age, coming from a very particular kind of libertarian political viewpoint, and they dominate disproportionately. And that, even without the meaning to, that ideology propagates down through a lot of the decisions they make and the technologies that we interact with. Just Facebook, for example, just the idea that, well, I think kind of tech executives like Zuckerberg have even said, a Google executive said this as well. He said, talking about Google Maps, well, I've got nothing to hide, what do I care if anybody knows where I live, there are lots of people in the world that it's very, very dangerous for them to know where you live. If you're lucky enough to live in Silicon Valley and be a middle-aged white man who's very rich, you have far less to fear than a middle-aged, educated black man who lives down the road and doesn't work in the tech industry. He can be shot dead just for walking in the wrong place. That's unlikely to happen to you. That's an extreme example, but, as we'll see a bit later, there's a lot of extreme examples in the world. Okay, the Palantir. This relates to the things I'm looking at as well. The Palantir is, Palantir is the name of Peter Thiel and other arch libertarians' company which does security tech and kind of security AI. And this is something I'm writing about at the moment as well for my second ODI blog, about the way that the tech and the data and the kind of disruptive industries love dystopian imagery. I'm not even sure if they really love it or if they just uncritically take it on board. Peter Thiel's company is Palantir, and the two of the big projects that they're running are called Gotham and Metropolis, which, for those who don't know, are the home cities of Batman and Superman, respectively, or, as I'm pointing out in what I'm writing, the home cities of the Joker and Lex Luthor. And the other thing about the Palantir as well, in terms of like thinking, wow, that's a great name for my tech company. If you actually read the text, or if you even just watch the film, the Palantir as a communication medium is firstly not neutral. The Palantir as a community, which is this crystal ball, which Saruman is kind of consulting here for those who don't know. It's not a neutral medium, and it's not a neutral medium because it's controlled by somebody else. It's controlled by the villain, Sauron, who not only controls it, but corrupts and destroys everybody who communicates with it. And because it's an asymmetrical medium, it's basically a medium for the big bad to destroy the world. So, when you think about it that way, it's a very odd metaphor, unless it's a deliberately sinister one, which could be the case. And talking of deliberately sinister, here's the wonderful viral photo of a member of the Saudi royal family, I believe, and Donald Trump apparently looking into the eye of the evil Sauron. Or being looked at, rather, by the eye of Sauron. This is the thing that I'm interested in too, the way that we're often, as users as well, but particularly the providers of the technology that enshrouds us now, are incredibly uncritical about even their own metaphors. They're just, somebody should, send them on a high school semantics course or something. It's just, even that level of understanding would help, I think. So in my research, my initial plan in talking about these kind of things was to kind of make something which sort of used this sort of mentality and sort of exposed it a little bit. And what I was originally planning to do was to use some of the techniques I already have, plus the kind of technological kind of AI kind of back-end things, to extract a lot of information from people, just to kind of interact with them for maybe 5 minutes. And from that, kind of leverage everything they said or everything they did to kind of hoover up all of this kind of information that's available from them that you can get about any of us from a small amount of information. When it's done maliciously, it's called doxing, which I'm sure some of you know. It's like dropping documents. It's a thing that's been done, again, has been done disproportionately to women who have loud voices online. It's disproportionately done to minorities. The Gamergate thing, it's just women doing incredibly innocuous things like saying, hang on, why isn't there a female character in this video game? You can choose the male character's shoes, but you can't choose to be a woman, or you can't choose to be a non-gendered person. And that led to some of those women being sent death threats, rape threats, packages being sent to their door, swatting, which again is the next level of doxing, which is when you call in a police report about that person because you've researched where they live. And again, this can be lethal. But in my research, I found very quickly that I could do that. It doesn't need to be an artistic project. I could do it now. This piece of software called Maltego, which again is another example, as far as I can tell, it means mist or fog in Welsh. But Maltego, for those who don't know, is a piece of software which you can download as a free version. It just runs in Unix. Is it Unix or Linux? I think it's Linux. You could just basically get a free trial version of it, and you can go all the way up to one that will do like 200,000 or 400,000 what they call transforms, which is a search through the available information. And what Maltego does is it correlates people's identities or data in general, but it can be used to correlate people's identities from very small points of data. So if you know someone's email address and like one other piece of information about them, this will correlate it, and as soon as it's correlated, it goes out like a virus, basically, and it goes out and it finds everything about that person, everything they're related to. This diagram, I believe, is showing everybody who's on the same email server as one particular target. And it can go out and it can find every piece. It can go, it apparently has APIs for things like Facebook. Hello, Cambridge Analytica. Because it can go into Facebook and go into the friend graphs. And it can, basically, it's like, it completely like maps out that person's identity. It can even, I think it has actually been used recently to investigate Russian hacking, because what it can do is that it can re-correlate or re-identify people who have been operating under different online identities and kind of merge them back together. So basically there's like a plugin that does this. And there's a library that you can just download from, and it will just do this kind of stuff automatically. So yeah, again, oh yeah, that's there. Just because I was thinking, yeah, it's just they can't help being sinister. They just can't, even with the names, they can't help being sinister. Mist, fog, you know. They don't call it, you know, Sunshine browser or, you know what I mean? They have to go sinister with it. And it seems pretty sinister. And again, this is a thing, it's very hard to trust these kind of players when they seem to so enjoy being sinister. You know, it's like, it's not cool to just, you know, it's cool in a kind of intellectual sense, but it's not like cool full stop to be able to like suck up every bit of information about somebody instantly. That's terrifying. And it's being done all the time. I went to a conference a few weeks ago which was aimed at kind of people who work in finance industries, insurance industries. And again, there was a demonstration there where a representative from an insurance company was happily saying, demoing, like when you go for an insurance quote, how they suck up all the information about deceased relatives of theirs, everybody who's lived there, former partners. It all just comes out in their interface the moment you like put your address in. And he didn't seem to think that was a problem. There were people in the audience who thought that was a problem, but he didn't think that was a problem. And he didn't understand why anyone would be worried about that. But again, he was a white middle-aged man. He wasn't, for example, a woman fleeing an abusive relationship with her 2 children, you know. They just don't think of these things because they're not diverse. They don't have people in the room saying, hang on, that scares me, you know. I'm a gay man, that scares me, you know. I'm an Asian mother of, I'm a single Asian mother of 2, that scares me, okay, you know. So again, I decided to not do that because I don't want to be the thing that I'm discussing, and also because it would be too easy. It's not artistic. It's just like, it'd be like, you know, putting a frame. It'd be like, should I say, it'd be like being Banksy. You know, it'd be like, it's just so obvious and base. So yeah, this is Manal al-Sharif. So and yeah, this is going on to the idea of the downsides falling disproportionately on certain people. Manal al-Sharif is a Saudi women's rights activist and who self-exiled now from Saudi Arabia. Again, her main campaign to begin with was on the subject, again, a relatively innocuous subject, you would think, of women being allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia. She wasn't, as far as I know, she's been very careful to avoid the things that particularly female activists get accused of, you know. Her tone was very reasonable because women get their tone policed far more than men do. But that was not enough to stop massive harassment of her, you know, both by strangers, by stooges, of which there are large numbers now online, paid by certain governments and activists and lobbyists, directly by the Saudi authorities themselves. So she has, in the last week, I think she was at a conference in Norway, publicly and very pointedly removed herself from social networks because, I'll just read the quote, "The same tools we joined for our liberation are being used to oppress us and undermine us and used to spread fake news and hate. Twitter is becoming a trap, and it's being used in a very efficient way by those governments, dictatorships and tyrants to silence us. And not only that, to spread their own propaganda, their own hate speech, misinformation and disinformation." So she has decided that she needs to find other ways to carry on the activism she needs to do because the cost versus benefit of her being on the social networks is not there anymore. And again, it's not surprising that people like her feel themselves unable to trust the systems that now surround us constantly. And it's not always as bad as this, but it can be pretty bad. You know, just yesterday, Tanzania, they're rounding up gay men via their social networks, their gay dating apps, and that's happened in Chechnya as well. There's various places in the world. Basically, it's, again, really crude, really basic. They catch one, they go into his phone, they find everybody he's communicated with, they go out and get them, and so on. It's like Maltego. You start with 2 points, 1 point, very quickly, exponentially, the network expands. Pretty soon, you know, even if 1 in 10, roughly 1 in 10 of the population are LGBT, you can very quickly round up 1 in 10 of the population through their social networks and their social communications. So, yeah, I'm going to have to speed up a bit. I'm talking too much. So this is Pipo-kun. He is the mascot of the Tokyo police force. So this is another kind of strand that interests me, is the fact that you can have authority without being sinister. Again, not that the Tokyo police force is without its problems, but generally Tokyo is one of the safest cities in the world. And Japan in general has a very, very low crime rate. Again, you know, they have the same crimes as everybody else, but generally their policing is pretty good. But it's interesting that their chosen interface with the world is through this character, Pipo-kun. Pipo is just like a pet name for police, and kun just means it's like a term of affection for somebody who's like your little brother. So yeah, there's a thing here saying, as you can read it, children, keep it safe. This is encouraging children to call the police when they see anything suspect. And that's the number you call in Japan to call the police, obviously. And again, it's not even very specific. It's just saying if you feel worried, call the police. So there's other ways to do this. Also, I was really interested to maybe, since a lot of the tech stuff is so dystopian, to try and do something that kind of brought the idea of utopia back again. Kind of, there's not much hope in the kind of the tech and the data industry. It's really easy to get downhearted, and you're quite right to. But also, you know, you need hope, you need optimism as well. So, and we used to be optimistic about technology. You know, we used to be, even the tech industry itself used to be about, you know, well, you know, the founding of the World Wide Web and the internet, you know, this was going to bring us all together, you know, this was going to open things up, this was going to blow apart existing power structures. It kind of did, but it sort of put them back together again. It's kind of like the T-1000 in, you know, in that film, you know, it's like it gets blasted into pieces and they kind of slither back together, you know. But again, we can't ignore the fact that actually things are pretty bad. So I think we have a responsibility, in fact, to try and be hopeful and try and do positive, constructive things with the knowledge we have. Yeah, because we've got this kind of nonsense. I'll try not to swear because I'm online. But yeah, this is the notorious Westboro Baptist Church who protest basically everything. Yeah, as we all know, there's a huge amount of division in the world right now. So again, as an artist, I don't want to contribute to that. You know, I don't want to be the thing I'm criticising. Yeah, finally, yeah, just this is one of my favourite quotes, yeah, from Oscar Wilde. And also this is kind of like stylistic goals as well. I mean, just look at this picture of Oscar Wilde. It's just you know, like the velvet coat and everything and the cape. It's just cravat, you know, it's just like amazing. But the real point of this slide is all art is quite useless. And again, my role here as an artist is to be constructive and to research, but not to be kind of pragmatically useful in the same way that some of the other people here kind of are. You know, I'm here to create and to make something and to come to a conclusion, but also art is useless. But that wasn't a criticism by Wilde as well. What he was saying there, because the full quote is all art is quite useless, as a beautiful flower is useless. It doesn't mean it has no right to exist, and beauty and flowers are really important in the world, you know, and they are useful in their own way. Beauty is useful, positivity is useful, making people think is useful. So what that means really is art is not pragmatic, and it doesn't have to be, but art can still be positive, and art can still change the world. An artist can change the world, and they have done, and we will continue to. And as I always say, and usually finish my talks, whatever the subject, by saying this, artists have been around for at least 30,000 years. Other occupations have come and gone. We'll still be here in 30,000 years too. So yes, I hope that was interesting, and if you have any questions, please ask me. Right, thank you.
So I'm here to hold the mic, but not to speak into it. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. If anyone in the room needs time to think, I don't know if we've had any questions online, Hannah? Not yet?
Yeah.
Please wait for the mic because we're live streaming.
Hi, Alistair. Have you done any research into why people do trust machines more than they trust humans?
Yeah, I'm looking at that at the moment. There's papers on it. It's not just a kind of an idle observation. It's definitely a trend that's been noticed. This is something that I'm not finished with this by any means at the moment, but part of it is it's to do with being human. It's to do with the cues that you get from another human being. Like when I'm talking to you, it's like you know I'm talking to you now. You're nodding. You know, it's like because you understand. You know, you're looking at me when I talk to you. So there's cues that you get when you're dealing with an institutional person, particularly again, like if you go to the job centre, you know, to pick a relatively kind of stressful negative example. It's harder for you to say to another human being, I can't make ends meet, you know, like I'm not earning enough money, my kids are hungry, you know. To type that online is easier. I mean, and again, I think this goes to the harassment and bullying as well. As we all know, that's easier online too, for the same reason, because it dehumanises, it distances, it keeps you away from that person kind of doing that micro expression, like when you just insulted them, you know. It's like even if you just slightly insulted someone, even if you politely pass over it, you see someone reacting that way, and you think to yourself, I shouldn't have said that. No, actually, that was rude. You know, should I say something about that? You know, did I offend her? Is she gonna, you know, will she forget it? You know what I mean? You know, all of these things that as a normal human being you go through. You don't go through that if you've got even the slightest veneer. And also, we again, it's because of the cultural thing. We think of machines as emotionless. Data seems emotionless to us. A data processing unit doesn't get upset when it kind of reads 100 reports of men in Tanzania being abducted, you know. We do. So yeah, in some ways it's sort of a no-brainer that it's easier to deal with a machine. But Yeah, I'm going to go further into that because that's the thing that I want to play with. It's just like how machine does an interface have to be before it stops. No, the other way around. How machine does an interface have to be before it stops being human? Even if there's a human behind it, like how much of the human do you have to hide? Or how much of the human do you have to show? Or how much of the human do you have to simulate in order for an interface to work? You know, maybe we'll come in the future to a kind of sweet spot between the human and that kind of machine interface where they're like well, I guess it's the sci-fi dream, isn't it? It's like the robot servant that kind of, or the robot helper that kind of is human enough to know what you're talking about, but not human enough to get upset by the things it has to do to help you, you know? Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really great.
Oh, you're welcome.
Just building on the question earlier and your response to it, and this point about the context in which we start to process the fact that something is a machine. So a lot of that, I suspect, is down to just culturally how we've engaged with technology. And I was reading something, watching something, a talk that Gillian Tett did about silos and their danger being not that we have silos, that in and of itself is not a problem. That's a result of the fact that human beings need to classify things to process information, but that we stop seeing them. And then that's when they become dangerous, when we no longer recognize that we're seeing the world through a certain lens. And I'm just really curious about any projects you've done or your explorations with regards to helping people contextualize data and be aware that there is a context, that it's not objective, that it's not emotionless. There's something behind that.
Just like everything I've ever done, it's like every project is about that in one way or another. You know, it's why I'm fascinated by lies and deceit and the lies and the we tell to ourselves as well. You know, the delusions we have that. You know, it's like, well, you know, I'm much more objective than her, you know, it's just obviously, you know, it's like, you know, she's being really subjective and he's being really biased, you know, it's like we're all biased. And as you say, it's not about pretending we're not, it's about, like the Portland office was, you know, again, that whole project is about encouraging people to look at everything around, not just the thing I'm doing, but to look at maps critically, you know, like, what is not on the map, like why is the map laid out in that way, you know, why is that data presented to you in a particular way, you know, why is this in the story and this not in the story, you know, again, I try to emphasize in everything that everything is ideological. There's no such thing. I worked at the University of Edinburgh in the Genomics department, mainly with social scientists, and there's a fantastic story. Yeah, sorry, Ian, but Ian Wilmot, the geneticist, most famous for Dolly the sheep, he was doing a panel talk with I think the Bishop of Glasgow. I think it was. I'm afraid I can't remember his name. But Ian made this kind of blithe comment of just like, you know, because the bishop was there, saying because somebody had questioned him about the morality of, you know, having hundreds of defective creatures before you got to the successful one, you know, and he said, well, you know. We're scientists, you know, and the Bible says, you know, we have dominion over everything, don't they? Isn't that right, Richard, or whatever the name of the bishop was? And the bishop just like gave him this withering look and said, you know, well, nobody believes the Bible is literally real, Ian. You know, it was just like a really kind of telling moment of kind of how glib, so even quite well-intentioned people can be about their blinkers, you know, about the rails they're on. It's just like, you know, thinking, you know, that. It's just that denial that we go into to not deal with things that are too morally difficult. And yeah, I mean, just to be clear, like the real point of that is not to have a go at Ian Wilmot, but to point out that it's very common in kind of things that are supposedly kind of like hard sciences for people to delude themselves that there's no ideology there. You know, when you work in the social sciences or you're an artist, you know that everything is subjective. You know, it's like drilled into you that everything's subjective, right? But I think in the kind of so-called hard sciences, things like data and kind of like genetics and these kind of things, I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that those things are not ideological as well. And they so are, you know, they just are, because we're human, because we're all human. Yeah, sorry, I mean, that was a bit of a rambling answer to the question, but I hope that was in some way illuminating.
Do we have another question on the floor?
sorry, it's me again. I'm going to regret asking this, but what's it been like as an artist to be embedded in an organisation that sort of carries out more conventional research?
It's been amazing because, for one thing, as you've seen, it looked like my ideas have really, really changed, as a result of being here and kind of talking to people and seeing what goes on here and seeing, and things like the kind of, I don't know what the most sensitive way to describe it is, the kind of the ethos generally, it's kind of like not a political place, with a capital P, but the kind of the idea of the kind of the general thrust of everything that goes on here is about a particular kind of approach to data and just the thing that's been kind of, I think, finally now drummed into me, just to pick one example, is not talking about like my data or our data, just talking about more the idea that data is something that kind of accretes around us and that is around us and to do with us, but is not necessarily ours or a possessive thing, which opens up all kinds of sort of political and you don't have to be political. It's not a political thing in itself, but for me, it's opened up all kinds of kind of philosophical things about, how much of this data and technology do we actually have ownership of in the same way that we own like our hand or our, or even our shoes, you know what I mean? So it definitely has had a real influence on the project, and I'm sure it will continue to do so as well. So, and just the diversity of the things that people work on here as well, and the fact that, I don't know, it jibes with kind of with how I work anyways, the idea that there's nothing that's so unimportant that you can't make a change to it. You can do things better, you can do things more efficiently, you can do things right, in the sense of doing the least harm to the most number of people, or actively doing good, by changing small things and by actually examining the detail of what you do, instead of just blithely going forward. Okay, that works, let's move on, just to actually interrogate these things and interrogate the fact that, all of us are enmeshed in this data that's all around us. And the idea of data as infrastructure as well, and like how it really is, data is not just a thing that we can take or leave now, in the developed world anyway, and increasingly in the whole world. It's infrastructure, and again, like infrastructure, there's politics and morals and social things that all go around it, and who gets access to it and who doesn't, and who's invisible and who's more visible than they should be or want to be. So it's huge, and I love the fact that it's huge. If it wasn't huge, it'd be really dull to be here. So I'm glad that it's a huge subject.
Alistair, that's a really wonderful point to end. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience, for coming, and audience online for being online. Just remains to say you can keep in touch with Alistair's progress through his residency, through his blogs that will be on theodi.org, our website, and within about 6 months we hope to be announcing the project that comes out of the residency, and that will be something that would be lovely to welcome people to come and participate with when it happens. But thank you, Alistair.
Thank you for coming. Thank you online.